Hi, I'm Alistair Chapman and I'd like to take a few minutes of your time to introduce you to this. This is the MTF B4 adapter. Now this is an adapter that I designed in conjunction with MTF services to allow you to use a B4, that's ENG style 2/3 inch lens on a Super 35mm camcorder. Now this adapter came about because I had, like many cameramen, a expensive zoom lens for a 2/3 inch camcorder sitting on my shelf that was no longer being used, and I really wanted to make use of it. I wanted to be able to have that servo zoom function on my Super 35mm camcorders. Now I looked at some of the PL adapters that were already on the market and found that they were A, very expensive, in the region of $5,000–6,000, and B, they weren't actually all that versatile. They were PL mount only, so would only go on cameras with a PL mount. So when I developed this adapter, I had two key things in mind. One was cost, to make it cost effective so that people like me could afford to buy it, and B, flexibility and versatility. So this adapter is actually modular. It's in two parts, and as a result it can be fitted to a huge range of cameras, not just a camera like Sony's f3 here, but it can also be fitted to a camera with an E-mount like Sony's FS700, FS100, and indeed any E-mount camcorder, including the NEX5 stills camera, the EA50, so a whole bunch of cameras there. It can also be fitted to any camera with a Canon mount, so it will also fit Canon C300, C100 and C500. So this mount and this adapter is extremely versatile. Now one thing to note, this adapter requires that the lens has a 2x extender. Now why is that? Why do we need to have that 2x extender? Well, to keep the cost down, I made use of the fact that when you engage the extender in a broadcast lens like this one, the image circle projected by the lens gets twice as big, and that gets close to filling a Super 35mm sensor, but it's not quite enough to fill the sensor. You'll get serious vignetting. So behind that, and incorporated into the lens adapter in this first section here, is a further magnifying element that adds another 1.5 times correction. So in total, with the extender and this adapter, you have a 2.5 times magnification of the image size, and that allows this 2/3 inch lens, the projected image from this lens, to fill completely a Super 35mm sensor. Now when you use an extender on a normal 2/3 inch broadcast lens and you switch it in, you'll notice that the image almost always tends to go a little bit soft. Well, that's simply because the image circle is being made bigger by the extender, so the lens isn't performing at its optimum. But when we put that on a Super 35mm camera like this, having that bigger image circle is what we want. So in fact now the lens is performing as we need it to perform on this size of sensor, so there isn't that drop in image quality. Now to put things into perspective, this is a low-cost adapter. It was designed with a budget in mind. A lens like this, in fact this is an SD lens, although this will work perfectly well, we recommend you use HD lenses. A lens like this combined with this adapter isn't going to give you the same look that you will get from a $50–60,000 dedicated Super 35mm zoom. It just isn't going to do that. You also have a 2.5 stop light loss. So this lens, which is f1.8, becomes the equivalent to about an f4 lens. So your lenses aren't very fast, but most of these Super 35mm camcorders are very sensitive, so that's not an issue. And generally speaking, when you're using this type of lens as a zoom lens, you don't want super shallow depth of field. So having an f4 equivalent aperture is quite acceptable in most cases. But what about depth of field? Well, you'll be pleased to know that with this lens you get the same shallow depth of field as you'd have with any comparable focal length lens on a Super 35mm camcorder, because it's actually the focal length of the lens that governs depth of field. So this lens, which is an 8mm lens at its widest, when you multiply that by 2.5 becomes 20 millimeters. So on this camera I get the same field of view and the same depth of field as any other 20mm lens on a super 35mm camera. So I get relatively shallow depth of field and a fairly wide angle shot. The field of view is comparable to what you would have had using this lens on your 2/3 inch camcorder. Because we have the optical conversion in here, the field of view remains roughly the same. So we have a versatile zoom lens that tracks focus throughout the zoom range, unlike a DSLR lens. And if you connect the zoom lead to a 12-volt power supply with a simple adapter cable, maybe to a DTAP battery like this one on here, we have a servo zoom. So I can have power zoom and I can zoom in and out from the rocker here on the hand grip. And with the right shoulder mount, this is a tilter shoulder mount, I actually have a really nice shoulder mounted camera kit, especially if you use an external viewfinder like the Alphatron or one of the Cineroid viewfinders. So I think this adapter is well worth the money. It does give you great versatility, great flexibility, allows you to use older lenses that perhaps don't have great resale value now, and it really does transform this into an ENG camera kit.